welcome. I'm Barry Borman. I'm the chair of PHONZ, and we're delighted to see so many people here for this, what will be, I think, very interesting and highly topical panel discussion on census changes, matching winners and losers in policy and research. And we have a distinguished group of people to discuss this important topic. Just to run through the way in which we'll manage it, I'll invite Peter to give a karakia in a moment. Just to say that James Grenville was unable to attend, and but we have Emeritus Professor in Statistics Stephen Haslett has joined as well. There'll be an opportunity in the Q&A and also in to show your hands if you've got any questions and comments. As we indicated, we are recording this. And after we've done the welcomes, I'll hand over to Len, who's going to chair the program through that. Speakers, Patrick and I will coordinate, hopefully, ringing a bell for the speakers 1 minute before your 5 minutes is up. And as I said, if you've got any questions or comments for the panel, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A. If necessary, we can actually extend till 2 o'clock. We're able to do that. So anyway, once again, on behalf of PHONZ, thank you for this for coming along. And I'll now ask Peter to give the opening karakia.
Thanks, Barry. Kia ora te marino, kia papapona mo te moana. Hei hure ma tātou tēnei rā. Aroa hatu aro mo ai tātou I tātou. Hau me hau ie tā ki hie. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Peter. Over to Len, the chair.
Right. Well, kia ora tātou. Thank you, Peter and Barry. What I'm just going to do is give a quick 5-minute overview of what I think of a substantive range of issues. And then we've got a series of speakers who are going to be asked to talk in order of their surname. And after 4 minutes, they'll be reminded, and then 5 minutes. Just to start, the little that I put up is, can you see the slide?
Yes.
Right. That actually, some of population statistics are both political and analytical. The first thing is they protect the trust of citizens and the constitutional integrity of the state. And that's a whole range of things, from establishing electoral districts, population-based resource allocation, right through to ensuring that we can trust the nature of the decisions government makes, because as government statisticians for many years said, we've got a great system of ensuring that you're on the electoral roll in New Zealand, and filling in the census means that you'll always be counted in policy. The second is of course, the understanding the nature, condition and dynamics of communities and generations across the population. Two things that I think are particularly important. Here we are entering into a period of a significant population storm, from increased longevity, volatile migration. The distinct demographic dynamics of Maori and Pacific are particularly and increasingly important in public policy now. And also, we are going to see, through increased longevity, a significant fall in the fiscal capability of the New Zealand government by somewhere between 30 and 35% over the next 20 years. So we need to be prepared for quite massive change. Just a little bit in summarising what I read, the reasons why, from the government statistician, the minister's point of view, we don't need independent expert justification because the rationale is so obvious. The first is that other countries are moving in the same direction. Well, that's fundamentally not so. The key element of a census, as you know, census of population and dwellings. The census of dwellings ensures that if once in a 5-year period, we know every place where people are. And therefore, we can then give them a form or bring them into the sample frame through administrative data or with other information. But we need to know where people are. We have no other way in New Zealand. So when in 2018 and 23, we did not carry out the same enumeration as we did in 2013 and previous censuses, we actually lost the comprehensive enumeration of the population that we've had before. Australia, Canada, the UK and USA are continuing to carry out a population census which is first based on knowing where people are. Arguing that this 223 is too costly, well, it costs twice as much per capita as any census we've had in the previous 150 years. Now, if I had been the Ministers of Finance when I was around, Richardson and Bill Birch, Gordon Brown, I would have had my guts strewn out over the place. Where was the Treasury? Where was the ministers? Where was the Minister of Finance? Where was Robertson? Where was Willis? Worrying about how did you have this one-off twice per capita? Even the external review of 2023 does not explain where the money went. The third point is stats are adequately cited on user needs. If you read the 2024 survey of user needs published on the same day the minister announced the plans, you will find it's probably one of the worst reviews of what people do with official statistics you've seen. It's simply very poorly designed. It tells us nothing about the demographic storm that we're in. It talks nothing about the impact of infrastructure investment, spending $200 billion over the next 20 years, issues of emergency management and environmental health and the environment. So in a way, it's telling us that we're planning to make a change without really knowing where we're going. Due diligence, well, in my view, the whole process has completely lacked transparency and integrity, and a lack of clarity on the political professional boundary. The fact that the minister, Dr. Retty, has been left to explain in the last month in the media and everything without a government statistician telling us what's been done is this, to me, given my background, this is the most significant reason why we need to be concerned, is that the process has not been carried out. The review by Mr. Godfrey and co, where people carried out a review and then they were told for 9 months, don't tell anyone about it. In fact, we didn't even know who was on the review for many months. And the 2018 and 23 reviews, people left the country before they could be talked to. So we've had 4 reviews, all of which are totally questionable. That the public won't support future censuses, well, they won't if we don't do it well. And we've demonstrated that. I think there's more I could talk about there. Well, the issues of the IDI, well, if we don't have a population census on the traditional way, many of the uses of the IDI will actually be reduced in quality because we won't have access to variables that are currently connected. Others will discuss household surveys. And my final point is confidence in the managerial capability requires more now than ever before. Firstly, we need an independent review, expert review of 2018, 23, right to 2030. We need peer-reviewed publication of the methodology in professional quality journals, and the government statistician must re-establish immediately the standing expert advisory committees that they abandoned in 10 years ago. It's impossible for a stats office to run without constant, regular interaction with users of its statistics, and that has not occurred in the same way that has been occurred in the previous 50 years. My final point is, given what's happened in 18 and 23, we need a clear plan B for 2030. What is the plan B? If it were me, the Australians are having a census in 2026 now, a traditional one. I'd be sending my best brains over there for 6 months to find out how they're doing it and how they actually manage it on the day. Just a little quick summary. What is integrating a Minister of Records of Persons means for population statistics? Our sample frame will now be essentially a de facto population register rather than anchored in knowing the households and places where people live. One of the consequences, we've wasted at least 5 years in not developing a national geospatial frame that will replace and build on what we need to know about where people actually are. The Environment Commissioner 3 months ago published a very powerful paper on why we need a geospatial frame. The Infrastructure Commission clearly needs it for its $200 billion that it's allocating. None of these issues are being discussed actively in terms of the seriousness with which they are. Well, I'll now just conclude my little brief introduction. These are the questions that I put to the panelists. However, they will have their own views. They've all come with a series of issues. And if I can just work out how to remove that while Polly Atatoa is getting ready to start her contribution.
O tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa o tangi ki ora ana koutou katoa toa. Ana mihi mahana i ngā kaupapa o tēnei rā. Ngā mihi nui ki ngā kaiwhakahaere o tēnei hui nō reira. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou me kia manuia. Ngā mihi nui to you, Len, and to you, Barry. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be on. My name is Atatoa Carr. I'm an associate professor here at the Institute of Population Studies at the University of Waikato, and a public health physician in paediatrics at Waikato Hospital. First, acknowledging PHONZ for this event and the opportunity to be here, and for Len for your overview and setting us up to discuss what we're facing here. We recognise, as you have, just that census is an internationally known cornerstone of democratic decision making, and any changes to that really must be guided by evidence and be well thought through. So, as I alluded to you earlier, Len, I am going to ignore the questions that you posed to us, not because they aren't really important, but because for this event and this opportunity, I thought I would focus my brief kōrero on some key implications for public health of this census change. Speaking predominantly really to the losers in this title, but perhaps there are also some winners as yet to be determined. My first, I have about 4 key points and 2 kind of general questions that I'm quite keen that we debate and discuss. And my first point, I think, really always needs to be the importance of Te Tiriti o Waitangi as fundamental to social and health policy making, and as fundamental indeed to public health and wellbeing outcomes. The expert review panel looking at the options for census transformation noted the impact of any census change on the ability to meet Te Tiriti obligations. And it's important that these discussions continue to recognise data as a cultural, strategic and economic resource for Indigenous people. And this change has a significant impact on both those obligations and this resource. The function of census is really as in our statistical system as a whole, but also as a benchmark for research and analysis, includes monitoring discrimination and Māori outcomes over time, as Len described, allocating resources appropriately, including for Māori outcomes, supporting self-determination. So our census is our only official statistical source of population level iwi data here in Aotearoa. So, as we slowly erode that over time, there are really important implications there. And also providing that granular level data, as Len described, a national geospatial frame to understand our Māori population, and particularly at a multivariable level, so by geography, etc. My colleague here in Tangira, Professor Tahu Kukutai, recently wrote that farewelling the census is likely to increase rather than ease Indigenous data gaps with a negative impact on Indigenous rights. And I think that's a conversation that we really need in this public health community to be having loud and proud. My second point relates to what we know in public health about our opportunities to advance health outcomes through action towards the determinants of health. And, this is a speech preaching to the converted, but we know that those determinants of health that have the biggest impact on health outcomes include issues such as safe and secure housing, education, occupation, income, access to identity, language, living in a supportive household structure, te mea. Many of you on the panel and here in this virtual room are experts in many of these really critical areas. And these areas are typically measured in census. So what some of them are absent completely, as Len described, in our administrative data sources. Some are measured, and some we have only proxy measures for those. So I think it's really important that we understand the concerns of replacing the social attributes aspect of a population census and the household component of a population census. Particularly when we think about the concerns that have been well documented in quality and consistency of administrative data and both assessment input as well as output reporting, including in the IDI, including differential quality for subpopulations and particularly for ethnic communities, Pacific communities, has been well documented, as have Māori. We know that there are both over-representation and under-representation of communities in administrative data.
Thank you so much.
Including data sources around the determinants of health. And it's clear that while the Census Attribute Survey proposed will be really critical here, it's as yet unclear how we will really understand the ability for a census attribute survey, which it appears to be prioritising an online methodology, will be able to really cover these attributes, particularly at that population level and that granular level, small area, small communities, that we really need to be able to understand the winners and the losers. My third point is around, and very related to my two previous points, but that's really around the priority in public health action of being pro-equity. We know here in Aotearoa we have such stark inequities as measured by ethnicity, deprivation, rural and urban geographical location, disability status, other forms of identity, and of course the intersectionality between these really critical aspects of our communities. And our ability to monitor these indicators of our system relies on census data. These variables that I've just described are either poorly captured or not captured at all in our administrative data sources. And I know that others on the panel may well be speaking to smaller area deprivation. So that's certainly something that that I think is really important that we have conversations about. And I can point to the work of Gerard Sonder and Debbie Ryan, as well as the Ministry of Pacific People, when we look specifically at Pacific ethnicity and multi-ethnicity for our Pacific communities in our administrative data sources.
Thank you very much, Polly.
Can I just quickly add my final point,
Sure.
Len? It's really about the crucial nature of monitoring trends over time. And you alluded to this, but also we know that when we've seen interruptions in this data, such as changes to ethnicity data question in the census, we have real problems in being able to understand the public health implications of our data system when we monitor those trends over time. And in relation to that, I think it's really important that we come back to this question of the ethical, the moral, and the tikanga tutiriti obligations of any transformation of our data system when we think about those overarching questions that perhaps I'll have an opportunity to come back to later.
Thank you, Polly. We'll have questions at the end when the other speakers have gone. And Florian, your session, your 5 minutes now.
Thank you very much. Tēnā koutou katoa, no tia mana aho, ina hoa ana ki taito kuluvin. Ko Florian aho, no reira, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Dr. Florian Flueggen. I'm originally from Germany, as I just mentioned, but I've lived in New Zealand now for about 10 years, currently in Taitoko. I have to apologize that I am feeling very unwell today, so if I have to have a coughing fit in between, please, my apologies for that. I am working for Skillity Limited, which is a research evaluations and analytics firm. And so we work on a variety of projects, usually in the workforce research space, but my background goes far beyond that in public health, wellbeing research, and other topics as well. To start my spiel about the census 20, well, whichever year we actually want to put next to it, whether it's 27, 28, 2030. I would probably want to start by distinguishing between two user groups of the census data. The first are the expert users, who are people such as most of the speakers here, but also some other people in universities, in other research institutes, but also in larger businesses who have access to admin data. For example, the administrative population census, so the APC that is already in the IDI, or other data sets, admin data sets in the IDI. And for those, the impacts of the census changes are quite different than, for example, the general public, who does not actually have access to the IDI and therefore relies on these official large-scale publications pretty much of the data, such as the census. And therefore, I want to treat these two groups slightly separately throughout my quick spiel, as I've said, because of different opportunities. And here we probably want to start off with something positive about the census, or the changes to the census. And that is that we probably have two kind of groups of variables as well. We have the variables that are very well represented in admin data at the moment already, be it such as, for example, a location, which has a pretty good quality in the admin data, but be it also variables such as income. Ethnicity is always one of those questionable ones about how trustworthy the admin data actually on that is, but there are some other variables which are already well represented, and where we therefore have less worry about the data from the census. And then we obviously have the data that actually has issues in the census itself as well, be it because of how the questions are worded, be it because of non-response and all of those kind of actions. The other group are the variables that are just not covered in admin data at all. And these are the ones where we have partly the biggest issues, but where we also, I believe, actually have very large opportunities with this change in the census. In that, the hope that I have for the census going forward is on the surveys that they have mentioned, that they will be conducted yearly, and has, however, Polly has already indicated, there's still lots of question marks around these surveys about what they will actually entail, how large the sample will be, how the sample will even be created, and other aspects. But the advantages that I am hoping for is that on the one hand, obviously, we have some more timely data, which we, for example, already have in the APCS. And if we were able to actually get to the census data, for example, yearly, that could help with decision making, particularly with the monitoring aspect and the evaluation aspect that Polly mentioned. This idea that we don't have to wait 5 years until we actually see whether the policy has an impact, but we can even see how a policy, for example, changes its impact over the first 5 years of being implemented, as an example. The other hope that is there is that, depending on how it is implemented again, there's actually a big chance here to review the entire census, to review all of the variables in the census, to really figure out what is it that the current population needs that we are interested in, but also the opportunity to change that over time, hopefully more quickly than in the past, but this again depends on the exact implementation. The big downside of this is obviously the time series inconsistencies that Polly mentioned, which we have with ethnicity, which we have with gender, which we even have with occupation, which is, as I said, from the workforce research area, one of the issues that we frequently run into, that there actually is no good occupation data in New Zealand, and even the census time series is inconsistent across time for many reasons, many very good reasons, but it still means that there's very limited potential for actually analyzing it consistently over time. The last part is that even for variables that are currently represented as being relatively good in the census or based on admin data or in the IDI, a lot of the data actually comes from historic census data itself, which by itself will become more and more out of date over time. So overall, I guess, to kind of, I believe I'm probably beginning to run out of time, we have kind of the big, just wanted to emphasize the two big issues that we have with this census change. The first is that while we do surveys still get a good overview over pretty much, let's call it average in New Zealand, which is a problematic term in this context, we lack the geospatial resolution of data, particularly for variables that are only covered through the smaller surveys. And this is the second part is that, and this is what I'm most worried about, is a low confidence for small populations. Polly's already mentioned, we have no actual reliable EV affiliation data, as an example, in Aotearoa at the moment. All of that information pretty much, at least in a reliable manner, comes from the census. There are some data sources that cover it as well, but how reliable and accepted they are is a different question. So we have that problem. We have issues with occupation, as the ones that I mentioned. From my perspective, there's no reliable admin data. And even if we wanted to get that, for example, through changes to how inland revenues data is collected, I do not think that we will get a proper source from that, at least not at the low level of accuracy that we actually require, because there are some very small occupations which we just cannot cover appropriately in a, let's say, 2 to 5% scale survey. And the last big one, which also has already been mentioned, is activity limitations or anything health-related that comes out of the tourists. There are no proper surveys that actually surveys the entire population where we can get that in a halfway reliable manner. And even if the census, as in the past, was used to enable follow-up surveys, that could, for example, specifically try and dive deeper into specific subpopulations or more data for them, that would not be possible without a reliable census going forwards. I'm out of time.
Yeah.
Cool. Then my last sentence, then my last comment pretty much is that we have these big issues, as I said, about data with no variables, with no admin data, variables with no admin data, but we have the issue about variables with small populations. And regarding the due diligence, which was one of the questions that Len had asked about in his email, I think this transparency is a very big issue that is fighting with at the moment. That they don't just need to engage the expert, but they actually need to do it publicly, and they need to share their responses to the expert advice publicly as well. They have to engage in the discussion, be in panels such as this to defend the actions, but also actually just share all of the internal research on options and limitations and the quality. I doubt that they have not done these, that they do not have a lot of this information already, and that a lot of this has flown into the decisions, but a lot of this information is not really easily accessible, at least. And I think here's this trust building transparency that I believe is a key part for the census going forward to try to establish that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Florian. The next speaker is Alistair Gray with his 5 minutes. Your microphone, Alistair.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Alistair Gray. I work for Statistics Research Associates, a statistical research and consulting firm. I'm going to probably follow on a little bit from what Florian has said, in that my main interest in the census is probably unusual in that one of my jobs is efficient design of household surveys. And so I have a concern about some of the changes that are taking place, and I want to maybe focus a little bit on that. And emphasizing, as Florian has just said, that there's not a lot of transparency. It's very hard to find documents. And so I'm going to explain a couple of things which I guess many of you wouldn't know. So one of the key differences in the administrative population census is we're moving from assigning people to an address to turn the arrow around the other way and assigning addresses to people. And in the Experimental Administrative Population Census 3rd edition document, their method of doing this is apparently machine learning, a black box. So it's very difficult to know what they're actually doing in assigning people who have multiple administrative addresses to what's the best address. Another feature of this, which I think is very important, is without really any discussion with experts, they've decided to really change what we think about as the composition at an address. So, for example, in the past, in the census, we can have multiple households at one address. And that's typically, for example, a villa might be broken up into several flats, but it might only have one address. There might not be a 10A, 10B, 10C, it might just be 10. What they're proposing so far is that there should be only a single household at an address by fiat, not by any discussion with anybody, I don't think, about whether this is wise or sensible. More particularly, they've decided that if there's both a private and a non-private dwelling at an address, for example, you've got a flat above a shop or at the back of a shop, then they're not going to assign that as a private dwelling. There's also problems, as we know these days, with holiday parks where people are living in caravans or cabins. There may only be one address for the holiday park. So we're going to have, for all of these three instances, a large amount of undercount of the population, because by their rules, we're not assigning them an address. Another thing that worries me in all the documents I've read is that this idea that we're moving away to having accurate statistics at the mesh block level, which mesh blocks have been around for more than 50 years, I think I'm right in saying. And that's been our standard geographic unit to try and analyse things. They're moving to SA1s, which are a combination of mesh blocks. Certainly in urban areas, that's only still often one mesh block. And in fact, 86% of mesh blocks, 86% of SA1s are no more than 2 mesh blocks. But that's not true in rural areas. As an extreme example, in the Waimate district, something like only 14% of SA1s are one mesh block. So as we move out to rural areas, we're going to get information at that geographic level that's not very relevant. I mean, the most extreme example is in Banks Peninsula, which was joined into the Christchurch city. This SA1, it has 16 mesh blocks. Now, from a point of view of hazard analysis, the sort of thing Len was talking about what environmental or infrastructure things, knowing something about 16 mesh blocks, which will probably cover, hundreds of hectares, is that a sensible lack of information? No. Another thing that really worries me is this idea that they're going to fill things out with surveys. Now, they've seemed to have backed down from the 5% survey. They're not saying what they're going to have, but can I point out that they're not actually running their existing surveys very well? For example, the response rates in something like the labour force survey have dropped pre-COVID from about 80 to 85% to less than 79%, and it's shrinking all the time. In fact, they stopped the expansion of HES partly because of poor response rates. But it's worse than that. In the labour force survey, the proxy rate has gone up a lot. Originally, when it was designed in 87, it had a proxy rate of about 10%. Now it's got a proxy rate of over 40%. So are we going to get this 5% sample that actually ends up probably only having a response rate of maybe 70% and then only having a proxy rate of 40 or 50%? So we're not really getting the information from the people that we would get in a census where the forms are filled out by typically everybody except maybe the parents fill out for the children. What I also want to say is that actually response rates overseas, everything fell away over COVID, but even in dear old the USA, their American Community Survey has got back to the pre-COVID response rates of about 85%. I don't really have much more to say, but apart from the fact that I've got a lack of confidence in the transparency of what's being done. As Len pointed out, we need more peer review outside of this internal sort of agreement that everything's okay. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alistair. The next speaker is Steve Haslett, and then because Kylie's not here, we follow by Professor Colin Simpson. So Steve, and your mic's off.
Thanks. I've got some slides and I'll put them up shortly. It's very nice to see so many familiar faces among the people who are attending. Some people I haven't seen for years, so great. Now, I'll try and set up my slides in a moment. Just need to do it in the right order. Look, I should perhaps explain who I am and what I'm about initially. I was asked to come onto this panel rather late, and I've put together some material which I hope is coherent. There are many issues I'd like to cover, but my own background is principally that I, like Alistair and Len, I worked at Stats New Zealand back in the well, should we say, the late 70s. And then I moved on to the university system. but I've worked as a National Science Foundation fellow in Washington, D.C. at the Bureau of Labour Statistics, and I've been involved for the last 20 or so years with small area estimation problems, principally with the United Nations. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Now, I'm sorry, there's just a slight hiccup here.
Would it be useful if I shared your slides for you, Stephen?
No, I think I'm there. It's working? All right, I'll just go to full screen. Oh, I won't. No, here we go. So, I mean, I was going to talk through a number of things, but the first point I wanted to make was, and I'd like to very much thank Alistair for his comments, because I've got major concerns about how you're going to design the survey or a cluster survey around what I'm going to call a pseudo census, particularly where the area information isn't there, and many of these surveys are area based. All right, so definition. All right, first thing is the proposed new census is not a census, despite its name, but it's a combination of administrative data sources and a new survey. Using administrative data, no matter how comprehensive or accurate, requires that any combination used has full coverage of the population. So I'm just raising some things that we need. Different sources are combined to get that coverage. Definitions of variables need to be compatible. So same definition and period. And there needs to be good linkage to allow matching of records. In my experience, administrative data sources are seldom complete in terms of the variables of interest. And when they contain data that's essentially transactional, generally the quality is maintained at best, only for the components essential for the transaction. So we start to get into problems that data collected for one purpose is not necessarily good for another, even if it serves its original purpose. If you're going to combine different data sources, they need to have things like the same means for continuous variables, if they're the same variable. And for categorical variables, they need to have the same categorization in similar proportions and categories. So what would be useful at this stage is a list containing each question the census currently asks, together with an evaluation of how well the administrative data and surveys can answer it. I understand Stats New Zealand has said that 40 to 50 questions could be answered via the administrative data and surveys, but which ones and how are not clear. Administrative data and survey data, which is not comprehensive in terms of its coverage, so only samples some people, they can be combined using statistical models. These can produce predictions for every individual in the population from a survey model that contains only data for those in the sample. But the point is the predictions at that level are not good. In fact, they're poor. Particularly for out-of-sample people. And the survey design information needs to match between the survey and the administrative source, which is why I commented about Alistair, because in the end, when we don't have a formal census anymore and we've got an administrative database, that itself is going to have to be used to design future surveys. That I see as a problem. Methods for combining data. Well, I won't go into these in much detail, but the small area estimation, proxy means testing, spatial microsimulation, they're not equivalent in method or intent, and they're not equally accurate, but I won't go into that today. I just want to say about proxy means testing and spatial microsimulation, they're often used to produce a single pseudo-census, so it's rather like a pretend census. In other words, it contains lots and lots of predictions, and these predictions are often provided as a data source for people to analyze. The difficulty is there's no recognition, there's a great deal of modeling error, even when the data are combined into regions or groups. They often sometimes used to look at scenarios, but many people in public health want to do something else that's more detailed. There are major risks if this data is treated as a census in analysis. basically the modelling error is in dealing with it is critical, and the methods for doing so are not straightforward. The alternative, one alternative is small area estimation. So we can use this for a survey alone, a combination of survey and full coverage administrative data. If you're using only survey data, it seldom offers marks improvements to direct estimates. It will never give very fine level local statistics that are sufficiently accurate. If you use administrative data and use that as the basis of predictions for variables that you've got in a survey but not in the census or the administrative data, then you have to look at the accuracy. And many pseudo-censuses could often construct in small area estimation to estimate that. But the point is that being able to estimate the accuracy doesn't imply that the results are accurate enough. So these individual predictions are combined by area or subgroup to form the small area estimates. But I think if we're going to go down this path, it's critical that the accuracy is discussed and documented. I understand and others know more about this than I do, an extended annual survey and use of administrative data. It's difficult to see how they can be well integrated, as Alistair has kind of been outlining. It'll be, because the surveys are going to be stratified cluster designs, and how can they be matched to administrative data, which is not necessarily structured in the same way? Family data, to me, this remains a mystery. So a good census is expensive. Cost blowouts in New Zealand were not for good censuses, but because methodologists and the experience weren't listened to. What has been substituted and what's the plan to substitute is untried, and it carries high risk of failure to provide necessary and even critical information. So the new census in New Zealand has no international precedent. We're moving into uncharted waters. Small areas and groups, well, I've mentioned this. I think usually it's hard to get much out for anything for averages groups less than about 15,000 households. Could be select group or for a small area, but I don't see that the Stats New Zealand plan is going to come anywhere near to meeting that criterion.
Steve, I'm going to have to cut you off in midstream for your 5 minutes.
I just want a couple of minutes more, because in the US, and this is important, the American Community Survey is used. The plans to do the same in New Zealand. But the US data is extensive and combined for over a 5-year survey, and the New Zealand Plan survey can't start immediately, and we cannot wait for another 5 years after that. I'm very, very unclear how SAPI is going to be used. But I do notice that, in fact, SAPI uses the decennial census estimates. So where are we? We can't use that as a model because we're not going to have the census estimates. I've had an interesting discussion, official statistics. There are issues around what is called official statistics. I can find nothing that would use, that say, even for SAPI, that would claim that data modelled in this way is official statistics or suitable for them. I think we need an external technical assessment. Thanks. That's it. Thanks, Len.
Thank you very much, Steve. I feel a bit embarrassed cutting off so many good people in midstream, but we only keep the 5 minutes. Now, in terms of getting questions from 200 people on a Zoom screen, it will be challenging. So if you could put into the chat thing your questions from now on and identify the individual that you want to address them to, that would be great. And the next speaker is Professor Colin Simpson.
Kia ora koutou, ko Colin Simpson toku ingoa. I'm a professor of population health at Victoria University of Wellington, and I'm also chair of the Data Ethics Advisory Group. And so this is a topic that's dear to my heart and something we've been discussing for certain for the last year. It is concentrating our minds. Just a quick plug about our group. So we're convened by the Government Chief Data Steward, and our main aim is to assist New Zealand Government. And what we want to do is maximise the opportunities and benefits from new and emerging uses of data. And I think a key part of our remit is to do so, but whilst responsibly managing potential harms and risks. we provide sort of various advice, comments, and views and recommendations to GCDS, also state sector agencies, and also we wish to assist government to innovate appropriately. So we're kind of we're open to government agencies coming to us, and of course Stats New Zealand do come to us very often for advice. So I'm sort of I'm trying to address the due diligence question, Len, that you put to us, and the importance of independent experts to review and to help guide Stats New Zealand. So it's not a complete blank canvas. There is a group there, and we're trying very hard. So you're not completely alone, Len. Another sort of key consideration of our group, of course, is reflecting the principles of Te Tiriti. And we're very privileged to have two amazing members who have been part of Te Mana Raranga. And I don't know whether they're on today. And we've also got another group of our other members are broadly representative of the New Zealand population. I have another plug, and that's with the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, and it's a small team. We're working off the smell of an oily rag, a very small budget, but we're trying to bring together guidance and tools to enable the ethical use of data. And we really want to be act as a network that draws on and leverages the knowledge and expertise of government agencies and also the wider community. And we want to do that. There's this question about transparency, and I truly believe that we need to be as transparent as possible in the approaches that we're taking. We need to go to the community, we need to go to the experts, and what we do want at the end of the day is a good outcome for New Zealand. And so it's really important events like today. And so thanks very much, Barry and Len, for organising this. I think it's very important that we are here together. Couple of things that are topics that are dear to my heart. One is about social license and what we do. And so I think it's very important as if we move away from census and into administrative heavy approach, that we actually have social license to do so. And so our plea to Stats New Zealand, and something that we've been helping to guide them carefully, is to actually have the social license and reach out to those communities who may be affected, and to ensure that they have a voice in the approach that's taken. And so again, I would say that these concerns are being listened to, and we are. It is very important that we take our time, and that the approach we take is considered and is for the best for the New Zealand population. I'd also like to draw attention to the Future Census Independent Evaluation Panel and the work that they have done. And I've noticed there are actually a few members of that panel here. So now is your chance to ask them some questions, and I'm sure they would be willing to participate in debate and discussion. And then my last point is really a kind of fundamental thing, which I think we're missing, is that the examples of where census has rather been discarded and it is using administrative data only. And one of those that keeps coming back, an example in my head, is Estonia, which has an enforced identity card for every member of the population. And now there is a reason for that, and fundamentally, everything is done electronically. And so actually, if you want to get things like bank accounts set up or you want to get married. It's very straightforward, often done in the blink of an eye, those permissions. The other reason is because they have a rather big neighbor next door, which is Russia. And so the idea is actually you can move the entire population's information, uplift it from Estonia and take it to another country altogether. So they have their reasons for doing this. And they have the social license to do this as well, because they realize the fundamentals and the practicalities that are required if something happens in the future. Thanks, Len. So I think that from our perspective, it is to challenge us as to the halfway house of a census that isn't working terribly well, or with some administrative data is perhaps not sufficient, and that we may be needing to move to one or the other. Now, I can't see individual ID cards working terribly well in New Zealand. And it was introduced. There was an attempt to introduce this in the UK, and there was terrible political blowback from that, and a lot of individuals who are not happy with that situation. And so we would need a technology that meant that all power rested with the individuals. If there was an individual ID applied, that those individuals had complete autonomy and authority over who gets to access their data and what it's accessed for. And so that limitation would need to be applied. And there would have to be complete social license for this to occur. And I can't actually see us moving away from census without the ability to go to an Estonia model.
Right.
And
thanks, Colin.
that's me.
Right. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Nichola Shackleton. Thank you, Nichola.
Thanks, Len. Kia ora, ko Nichola tōku ingoa, he kaiarahi kai tātari aho ki muku tangata, tēnā koutou katoa. So I'm Nichola Shackleton, and I'm currently the lead analyst at Muku Tangata, which I guess for the purposes of this, I do workforce analysis stuff at Muku Tangata. I just wanted to start by saying having the census data linked to the admin and survey data is what brings the sort of immense research value that we all get out of the admin data. And that is something that is acknowledged internationally, and certainly something New Zealand researchers have made great use of and have, influenced policy and decision making by bringing that information together. My spiel, if you like, is in 3 parts. So the first is on process, the second one is on key risks, and then the third is on, okay, so what do we need to do? What do we need to know? So from my reading of the documents that I could find on the Stats New Zealand website, which I must say I do find a little bit difficult to find the information, is that there was an expert panel brought together. They did provide robust advice and recommendations for the future of the census based on the options they had. So the parameters that they're working in, they recommended a staged transition. So they recommended still do a full census in 2028 and then move to the 5% continuous surveys by 2033 with later integration of household surveys. So, keep the data quality by some time so that we can improve the systems around it. That option got revised due to funding limits, and counter proposals were put forward with a recommendation to move directly to an admin data first model with the census attribute survey set at 5% annual samples. Although I will say it says 5% in the things I've seen online, but in other correspondence, that's kind of been revised to 2 to 5%. So there's already some wiggle room coming in there. I guess it depends on if you're talking about households or individuals. The decision was made despite, the clear advice that admin data systems are not ready yet. So I guess the concern there is panel recommendations from what I've seen, and this is just my interpretation, they seem to be largely sidelined. Many critical warnings about admin data readiness and risk to smaller groups seem to have not been accounted for. And a lot of the recommendations that the panel made still sit in sort of a to be considered bucket in the response from Stats New Zealand to the panel, which gives time for things to slip a little bit. When you look at the analysis and the process, it's kind of hard to see how the decision was driven by anything other than funding and operational efficiency goals. And I think that people in Stats New Zealand, as well as the members of the panel, are probably somewhat frustrated by the decision that was made. So I think when we talk about Stats New Zealand, we do need to separate out, there are people that work at Stats New Zealand, and then there's the decisions that get the Stats New Zealand label on them. And I'm sure not everybody agreed with the decisions that were made. If the approach succeeds, we will have a cheaper, more frequent census. We'll have cheaper, more frequent census-like data from 2030 onwards. And the argument is that by moving more quickly to an admin data first approach, we'll get to the same endpoint quicker, and we'll have more frequent, flexible, and eventually more granular data, which would be amazing if we can get there. But there's some strong sort of dependencies there. So other government agencies need to improve admin data, and very fast. And that's not necessarily something Stats New Zealand has direct control over. There would need to be targeted surveys for Māori and other small population groups, and these need to be prioritised, well-resourced and well done. And there needs to be continued public trust in Stats New Zealand, which probably will need careful management, as the first data that's going to come out of this proposed approach will lack granularity and will be less accurate initially, especially in that sort of 2028, 2030 period. And I think if this option goes wrong, we're either locking ourselves into a weaker data model with continual persistent data gaps, especially for smaller geographies, Māori and small population groups, or we end up spending money on a census in the early 2030s to rectify the situation. Key risks, as I see it, are coverage gaps. So it's unclear what's happening with non-private or temporary dwellings. This is something Alistair alluded to. And excluding them does risk significant undercounts in key populations. There's potentially a loss of information on household composition and relationships. That kind of information is very hard to get from other sources. So you might be able to get it from... So in terms of admin data, there's family relationships that are available for people who are receiving government benefits or working for families, since family structure is needed to determine whether you get that entitlement, but that's only a subset of the population. And we need to know about household composition and relationships when we're looking at socioeconomic factors, as well as understanding children and family circumstances in the context of poverty, health, or well-being. There's going to be a loss of self-identified high-quality data, so I'm surprised nobody's gone into the ethnicity thing in more detail. I thought being second to last, this would be well covered by now, but the census is by far the best source of ethnicity information. It's one of the places where you can report as many ethnicities as you identify as. And it's often held up, like there's analysis done by the Census Transformation Group, as the gold standard for ethnicity. And there's no kind of service-linked or third-party record there. It's, oh my gosh, am I there already? Okay. Impact on Kotul. I will speed up. NZDEP. What's going to happen there? At best, a break in the time series. We don't know what's going to happen with the funding models. We don't know how we're going to be able to monitor equity going forward. The disability survey, to Kupenga, they both rely on the census as their kind of sampling frame. Census is a gold standard for checking admin data. So if we take it away, how do we spot where there are systematic errors coming in? Occupation data. So we know it's not perfect in the census, but it is incredibly useful. And I had a whole spiel on that, but I'll cut that short. So what do we need now? We need more information. So we need more information about the surveys, costs? How will non-private dwellings be included? How will clustering be handled? How will critical outputs like NZDEP, electoral boundaries, iwi data, surveys like the disability survey and Pukenga be supported going forward? We need evidence that admin data is fit for purpose, and if it's not fit for purpose, how can we sustainably make it fit for purpose, and how do we safeguard it? Because admin data can be changed in terms of service requirements, government policy, and it can be changed differently across different regions, which can impact how you want to compare things. We need transparency on return on investment as we move forward. Because we know what the return on investment for the census is, we don't know what the potential return on investment is for this new approach. And it would be useful to see a document that showed the plan for every variable currently captured by the census and every key survey or tool that we use based on the census. Will we get this information going forwards? When can we expect it? And what will the coverage and quality be like? Sorry, I went over, Len. Apologies.
Thank you very much, Nichola. It was just, I guess, you, as the other speakers, have reminded us, if only the government statistician had told the rest of us in October 2024 that he had made this decision, we could have spent the time between now and then giving you all the due couple of hours that you need to speak, rather than crashing all this in because we only found out last month that decisions were made about 8 months ago. The final speaker, and I hope that Barry, by the way, will take his cue for this and be planning a larger series of sessions where, in fact, individuals dominate the program rather than be asked to slice in briefly in this way. I feel embarrassed about cutting off so many of you with things that I'm just sitting here really appreciating greatly. The final speaker is Helen Viggers.
Nā koutou katoa, ko Helen Viggers tōku ingoa. I work for Hei Kaingauranga, the Housing and Health Research Program in the Department of Public Health at the University of Otago. And just to go right back to state the obvious, to work, democracy needs to be informed. Both people and politicians need to know how the country is tracking so we and they can make informed decisions. We count what we care about, and choosing to count and not to count something can be a political act. Following on from something I think Nichola said earlier, calling something a census that is not a census immediately calls into doubt the ability of the organisation doing that calling to name things precisely. And I think that's a problem in and of itself. I would second that we know that the Future of Census Independent Review Panel was given a really constrained set of options to choose between, and when they presented their chosen option, Stats New Zealand responded by saying it was no longer applicable, which sounds like they had hoped that option was applicable at one point in the past. So everything seems to be a moving feast at the moment. So I suspect we don't know and nobody knows, though maybe that's being overly pessimistic. The census so far has been a census of populations and dwellings. Most people concentrate on the dwellings, but I'm in the Housing and Health Research Program, and we love dwellings. We want to know about dwellings, and there are very few administered resources for dwelling information in New Zealand. Such information as comes from might come from building consents if it managed to get grouped up by all the TLAs as still going to be only for new dwellings or dwellings that have had major building consents happen to them. There's going to be a critical shortage of information on dwellings, I would imagine, when we move to this model. But going back to thinking about census, 3 areas where census data excels for people is information about small geographic areas, information about small, relatively dispersed groups, and understanding of household and family relationships. So I thought I'd talk briefly about these through the lens of a couple of projects I've been involved in. And one of them is NZDEP that a couple of people have mentioned earlier. It was designed deliberately to use census data to inform funding decisions for small areas. and it's been produced since 1991. The census small areas, first mesh blocks, then SA1s, have been absolutely central to its production. In the last round, 2023, which I was privileged to be added to the team on, so I feel slightly embarrassed to be talking here instead of some of the others. There was enough data from 95% of the SA1s to use the SA1 as the basic unit of analysis. We've recently completed a similar analysis, but considering only owned dwellings. And in that analysis, although about 2/3 of dwellings in New Zealand are owner-occupied, only a quarter of SA1s were able to be considered as a separate unit of analysis. And I think that's an indicator of what's going to happen when we try to combine small sample surveys. Even with a 5% sample survey over 5 years, that's going to end up having a lot of temporal and geographic fuzziness if it ends up using that thing. And the team really wants, and is as committed as it can be, to finding a way to produce NZ going forward. But we're not sure yet the best way to do that. We've certainly taken a look at data in the IDI, and not many of the variables that we use for NZDEP are available in good quality there, and there didn't appear to be many other candidate variables that met the stringent inclusion criteria. So there's going to be enormous flow-on effects for the ability to precisely identify small geographic areas in need of targeting for extra resources. And I've also been involved in the work on severe housing deprivation. This used census data and the New Zealand definition of homeless to identify 4 groups in severe housing deprivation: people without shelter, in temporary accommodation, sharing accommodation, and in the 2 most recent censuses, uninhabitable housing. About 2.3% of the population met this definition for the 2023 census, and these people are spread across the country. Only a subset of these could be accessed through a targeted survey, and that's assuming that these dwellings would be counted as in scope. And as we've heard earlier, there's non-private dwellings are becoming maybe out of scope for some of these analyses and then going forward. The information used to identify, for example, uninhabitable housing is not collected through routine admin data, and people who are temporarily staying in a dwelling may not be considered usual residents and so excluded. And yet there's such a need for, in this group, for the focus that comes from the basic ability to count them. Both NZDEP and severe housing deprivation estimates need an understanding of the composition of households and family relationships. The Stats NZ released some estimates last year which showed poor matches. Even Europeans had only 90% matching of addresses, and the result was worse for other ethnicities. I have an extreme suspicion that the least advantaged people are those who are going to have the worst matching data to admin data, and therefore the most likely to inadvertently fall out of future analyses. I think that looks like my time is up.
Thank you very much. As I said before, we probably needed 10 sessions. What I'll do now is just go through the priority order of people who have asked questions. The first one is Dennis Truen from Melbourne.
Thanks, Len. I know some of the faces here, but not everyone. So I'll briefly introduce myself, perhaps to provide some credibility to my remarks. I was actually Deputy Government Statistician in New Zealand for 3 years in the 1990s, working with Len. I was Australian statistician from 2000 to 2007. And I've actually been involved in every census since 1966 in some way or another. Most recently, as one of the independent reviewers of the quality of the 2016 and 2021 censuses, and for the 2026 census, I was asked a few months ago to do an independent assessment of the proposed methodology for that census. Also relevant to my remarks, for 10 years I undertook independent quality audit of Statistics Sweden's main data collections, including those that were based on administrative data sources. As Steve mentioned, the New Zealand admin first-based census would be a world first. Other countries have used administrative data in lieu of collected data for their censuses, but they all have had population registers. So doing it without a population register is a first, and in my view, quite a courageous move. Ireland considered it, and they had the advantage of having a personal identification, personal ID, I should say, common across their administrative systems. But in the end, they decided that they weren't ready to do it yet. My first remark is I think it's very important to understand the error structure of the proposed methodology. Our work in Statistics Sweden, I work with Paul Beamer right away from the Research Triangle Institute in the US. We adapted the total survey error framework, but the word adapted is important. For example, we included specification error in our framework, and I think this is very important here because data you collect from administrative data sources may well be different to the target variable. And we also know the timing's different, that we're not, by using administrative data, you're not necessarily getting what that variable is on census night. It may be the data that was collected some time back and not been updated even when it should have. We also developed a separate TSE framework for administrative data, like the population register, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few moments, and for compilations like the national accounts, and for those data sets where there was linked data. And this is most important because not only can there be linkage error, but some of the variables, even though they should be the same, in administrative data sets may not be for one reason or another. I'm not sure to the extent that there has been an error analysis in Stats New Zealand, but I think it's if it hasn't been done to a large extent, I think it's important. It's a basis for understanding the relative importance errors. It's a basis for understanding what the design and mitigation strategy should be, and it's also a basis for reporting to users on the strengths and weaknesses of data. I suspect they will need a large-scale survey run shortly after the census, not only to provide some of the data required for mitigation purposes, but the additional variables not collected in the admin-based census, but are still important, and also perhaps to provide a post-enumeration information for a post-enumeration survey, because the coverage of the administrative data won't be perfect. There will be weaknesses. And both Steve and Alistair spoke about the difficulties there are of running surveys in New Zealand at present. And I use the word large scale because of the importance of geography. The adjustments you need will vary by geography. They'll be quite different. Yeah, sorry, Len, I'll hurry up. They'll be quite different depending on the extent of deprived, ethnic, or young people. My second point was Stats Sweden. They run a high quality register, of course, because it's part of the way of life in there, but it still has problems. And interestingly, the main problem they have is overcoverage. People who don't remove themselves from the register when they should. And this is predominantly among migrants who return to their homes and young people who are more mobile. And the last point I was going to make was I think the importance of the developments on the address file. It seems to me this has the potential to provide a place-based framework for the census, where administrative data can be used to provide place-based data. And also it may provide a framework for updating census data between censuses. The last thing I just mentioned is that I forgot to mention is that even though Statistics Sweden has a very accurate population register, despite several attempts, they can't derive family statistics. They found it simply impossible based on register-based data.
Thank you very much, Dennis. That international perspective is quite vital. I'm not sure that we've done enough of it. Michael, you had some comments to make on the independent review panel, and I'm not sure which Michael it is. Okay, if Michael's not there, then Bronwyn Chesterfield, you raised a question of will Stats New Zealand be responsible for and accountable for monitoring the adverse effects particularly for whānau Māori and Pacific peoples, and in the absence of a varied and well thought out monitoring framework. Did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, kia ora, Len. Yeah, sorry. It's, I guess, more of a sort of rhetorical question at this stage, because I'm sure that hasn't really been thought of in much detail, but obviously it's something I'm very aware of, and I'm sure many people on the screen are very concerned as well about the impacts of this and how we can keep an eye on it. But very interested to hear if anyone has any thoughts around that at this stage. Kia ora. Thanks, Len.
Thank you. There's a comment from Philippa. Did you want to make some comments on the panel, Philippa?
Yes, I would. Sorry, my laptop's crashed, which is why I can't show my voice, my face. Yes, I was on the panel, and I took it as an honour. I've worked with Helen very closely, and we're very concerned about Te Tiriti and Pacifica, and also housing. And we basically became clear very early on that the government had already decided that they weren't going to have as Nichola explained, and also Michael, they were not going to spend 20 million or whatever on the going out and doing what was required to get good high census response. Well primed by Len, I must say. I argued for many of the things that people have discussed here, and I was particularly, and I'm not speaking for other people obviously on the panel, but there was a very strong sense that the direction New Zealand Aotearoa was moving in terms of diversity and being able to follow through those different cohorts of people, particularly, for example, LGBTQI for the first time, where there was an understanding of what they were experiencing, and the work that Helen and I had been doing in the severe housing deprivation and so forth. There's critical issues of sort of throwing people into emergency housing, and then possibly transitional housing, and then saying, no, more people can go in. Those dynamic issues, which are highly politically volatile, we don't have already enough information about that, and that unsurprisingly leads to a real increase in homelessness, which is impossible to measure properly in any case, but only get an estimate at each census. So that the whole thing is very concerning, and I mean, I've talked to Len a bit about this and other people. It seems even with a change of government, it would still take quite a long time to set up. I'm very, very concerned about it and feel. But I can say there was a very, very thoughtfully collected people on that panel. They all argued much the same as people have done here, and it was to no consequence.
Thank you very much, Philippa. Before Jonathan speaks, can I make a comment? Having been involved in official statistics, like my friend Dennis Trewin, for over half a century, this is the first report that I know of that's been organised by an independent panel, produced its results, and they were sat on for well over 6 months until it was politically appropriate to release them. And in between time, the people on that panel were advised not to say a single thing. They were essentially under embargo. I don't know any statistical office in the world, other than probably the old East German one, that would have actually done that. So, Jonathan, you've got some comments, and we'll look forward to them.
Thanks, Len. So I just, I think there's some things that are now quite evident that that people on this call need to think about, and one of them became quite evident as part of the panel, 13 months ago, and that is that Census Day, March 2028, is now extremely unlikely, both politically and, I would say, for those of you with greater technical knowledge than me, unlikely in a practical sense to be able to be delivered. To the point about the panel membership and our silence, when we were signed up, the cabinet decision that would have been in keeping with a 2028 census date was the plan. There was a paper that was proposal, had to go to cabinet by law in order to get Census 2028 funded. And our report was only ever going to see the light of day alongside that cabinet decision, which was supposed to have been taken in late 2024. You will now know that it wasn't for at least 6 months afterwards. Appeals to have that silence overruled would have needed cabinet approval because it's cabinet that gagged us. I'd like to say thank you to Nichola for putting the context of the independent panel's work on the table for you. That's saved me from doing so. What I would say, in addition to what's been aired already, is that an extremely high focus for the panel, and I would say Stats NZ officials as well, is the major problem that we face in New Zealand with trust and confidence of government and in fact of Stats NZ as well. Evidence was available to the panel on who Census was working for and who, in at least the last 2 census exercises, who Census was not working for, and in addressing concerns about quality, the most vulnerable parts of the New Zealand population were the ones with the most vulnerability to any census exercise in future. The one set of recommendations, and someone's put the link in the chat for people to go and have a look. There are a few recommendations that the panel made that were ultimately deemed out of scope. I would suggest that you look at those recommendations in particular. They are the ones that are not exercisable by Stats NZ alone. They were the ones that said there needed to be a much higher authority in control, with cabinet monitoring of changes, and in particular speaking to the concern about admin data quality. While it might be hard to match up organisations who are willing, it will be even worse to try and get organisations to change if there is not buy-in for admin data first at the highest level, and we meant cabinet. I would suggest, as you read the report we put out, that you remember that it was written in 4 weeks, that it was finished about this time, or a bit more, 13 odd months ago. That's how the world was at that point in time. There are questions in that report, though, that transcend the 13 months since, relating to quality, which New Zealanders are being served by the census, which New Zealanders are actually included in the census, and all sorts of questions relating to where we get the admin data from and how we get the other stuff as well. There is questions, I believe, about the exposure of work that Stats NZ is already doing that would help some of today's discussion. In particular, Alistair raised good comments about the idea of a register of places and what could be done even in just that one area that would make an admin data first approach less risky.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you very much.
Excellent anticipation, Len, too.
Gerald Sonder, did you have some comments to add to your piece that you've put in?
Sorry, yes. Not really comments. I just shared the information. We drafted a submission to Stats New Zealand explaining the ethnicity data quality for Pacific people and how that has led to inequity for more than a decade already, and that has not been addressed in the new census reforms. And I think it's an opportunity, and also we should try to address that as well, improving. And I made a document with suggestions how to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alan Blake, you had a comment on the loss of data in moving to an IDI only.
Thanks.
Whoops.
Sorry. Thanks, Len. My camera's not working either. I was just interested if anybody has spotted that we were going to lose our travel to work data and travel to school data, which is the only census level information we get on that particular travel, and particularly for walking, which is a key health issue. I think it's not supported well by NZTA, and I just wondered what people think that we might how we might address some of the. I mean, I'm sure it's not the only bit of data we've heard about, some of the ethnicity and whatnot, but how people think we can address some of those if this process goes ahead. Thanks.
Thank you. Can I comment there? Given that we seem to be blissfully unaware that of our 67 territorial local authorities, they're now all moving in an entirely different way through to the very different demographic influences that we now have compared to the baby boom years. And my suggestion is that the more we withdraw from thinking about things that are related to place, we're going to find large local authorities are going to have to set up their own information management systems in order to understand what's happening in their places, because the national measures, as we're being developed them at the moment in quite ignorance of that change, will require a huge local focus on separate intervention management. And if we think about it, our population projections, based primarily on cohort changes, are going to be themselves much less reliable when you come to forecasting what's going to be the future population for your infrastructure management, when the population drivers in each part of New Zealand are very different from each other. And so there's these aspects we haven't discussed today, but there could be a whole session for a couple of days just on what's happening in place, and are we going to lose our knowledge of place? But it probably won't matter if we disempower local government enough. Michelle Marco, you had a comment. I assume that was Michelle Marco. David Schaff, or is Michelle? David Schaff.
And thank you for the opportunity. I work at Te Aho o Te Kaho, which is the Cancer Agency Control. And some life back earlier on, I was working at Ministry as an advisor, and I was involved in the group reviewing and then the HISO standards in terms of ethnicity data. And that was back in, 2017, we submitted the report of that review. And I know for sure there's some concern about coding in the system, and I can only speak in the health sector, that is incomplete, and there's a lot of challenges. And I would have thought that these are the kind of things that your panel before has mentioned about sorting those things out before we go to those admin data as a resource to depending on no census. And so that's the health sector. I'm not sure of the other sectors in terms of their admin data, and I'm sure that everybody here would know there are challenges in those admin data. Thank you.
Len, can I ask a question? Len, you're on mute.
Len, you're on mute.
Sorry. If the panelists want to now summarise, or do we have a final question? I didn't.
Len, there's just one question that I'd like to raise, is that if it's a fiscal decision, and that seems to be one of the reasons, because it cost so much. The last census cost, what, 400 million to run, whatever that is, I don't know. Could Stats New Zealand run a census for 425 million? I mean, could they do it? I mean, that seems to be a question that there's a lot of money being used and there was a response rate. But if there was a marginal increase, would it be possible to do a census for 425 million? I don't know. That's just the question. It seemed to be that we're not, you've got a response rate of this for 400 million. It's a financial decision rather than anything else.
I say, as a census is a typical product with what you might call an unrealised asset value, simply because the people that produce it don't know who use it, and most of the users are really poor at explaining what they do with it. And as a consequence, even if you look at the amount of money that we spend anchored around a census over a 5-year period, you'll probably find it's about 100 times the cost of the census, if you think of benefit payments right through to infrastructure. Given that the last census cost twice as much in real terms as any one before, it is an outlier. And I guess as statisticians, most of us know that the joy in life is understanding the outliers. We don't seem to have got much joy out of that. There's virtually no serious analysis of where that money went. We don't, for example, know the difference between contact and refusal. What's the mix and where it is? And if you take my view that we totally failed to actually contact the places where people are and know where they were, then the non-contact rate is probably much greater than is being assumed in many of the discussions. So I think that's enough. Of course, you could spend 400. I can assure you can spend money as a stats office, but you've still got to do it in a way that's credible. We know that nearly all the other countries that are focusing on place-based RAMs, because the thing that we're missing here is not just a move to admin data, it's a move to a population statistics frame based on persons rather than place. Yet we know that most of the dynamism in our population system is coming from differences in what's happening in place, and that's driven by the huge differences in importance now by Maori and Pacific populations, the difference in ageing and things. So, well, can I suggest we just flick through and then, in fact, you must have the final word, Barry, sorry. Polly, have you got a minute to summarise?
Sure. Look, there's obviously the biggest summary is that there's still a lot more to discuss, and that we've really only scratched the surface in the key areas today. And in response to your question, Barry, I think what we actually will also see is that they will spend that amount on this not census. Because there hasn't been an analysis of what effective census attribute survey will be, and we've had discussions about that. There also hasn't been any analysis of the costs that are going to be required to improve administrative data to make it fit for purpose. And in fact, I'm on an ethnicity data standards group, and we have heard that that data standard cannot be mandated because there is no resource to spend in those government agencies. So while it might not be spent in Stats New Zealand, it will be spent very on a large amount across the board, let alone the cost of making poor decisions, including to exacerbate inequities, which we know are fiscally very expensive. So, my summary really, Len, is, as Jared has put in the chat, there is a lot at stake here. And it's really useful to start this korero on the back of a lot of work that everybody here in the group has done over the last few years. So, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa.
Thanks very much, Polly. Florian?
I will have a shorter summary just because I'm not feeling so great, as I said. But for me, probably that there was a lot brought up in these conversations here. There was a lot of new insights from the panels as well, which I find found quite interesting. There are lots of attendees here today who I believe will have some possibility maybe to influence some of the decisions going forward. And I have no idea how much chance we actually have to change a fiscal decision from the minister at this point, because as was mentioned, this decision essentially lay with them, not with that and that. And I think a question will be a lot about what can we actually do over the next 5 years to minimize or mitigate the issues for the specific subpopulations that are or will be negatively affected. How can we work with these populations, and what approaches, as I said, possibilities do we have to, make things not as severe for them? And I hope that stats can do some part to mitigate the lack of transparency, as I said, a lot of the information, a lot of the quality estimates they will already have. I don't think that they would have made a decision without it. It's just a question whether they are allowed to publish it and in what manner and the time frame as well. I'm looking forward to what will happen over the next few years in this regard and in regards to the engagement with the other expert panels. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Florian. Alistair Gray.
I really don't have much to summarize. I thought it was very valuable hearing from Dennis, because what I find is it's very difficult to know whether what stats is saying about international experience is true, because when one digs for oneself, one often finds contradictory things. So I think it was very pleasing that Dennis pointed out that I thought the very valuable thing was that Statistics Sweden has been unable to produce family statistics data from their register. So, and that's such a crucial thing. And so I really don't have much more to summarise. Thanks.
Thank you, Alistair. Steve?
No, excuse me. Yeah, I too would like to thank Dennis. I think one of the things that, we're talking about the application and the use of this information that might be possible to extract from this new data source, but we're not, we need a lot more effort being put into getting the methodology right to the extent it's possible. This is a new area. No country's ever done this. And mysteriously, there's not much discussion about how to do it. My concern about that is it takes time. I remember working at Stats New Zealand on designing the manufacturing survey when I was there in the 1970s. And we had a manufacturing census, and that was the basis for the design. So it's not just one census that Stats New Zealand does. It does a number of censuses, not necessarily a population. And I'm not quite clear what the government's plan is for those. So I think we've got a broad front on which we need to be looking at this stuff, and we need to be thinking about both what might be missing and how we might best get it and whether it's possible to get it. But I have major concerns about administrative data sources being combined. Government departments, in my experience internationally, can't cooperate with one another. Quite how this is going to lead to a formal database combination that actually works is completely unclear to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Colin, you had some final comment.
Thanks, Len. Yes, no, just to say, no, it's been an excellent panel. Listening and hearing from everyone and growing my knowledge base. So it's been really excellent. A plea to those in government, if you have embryonic ideas around use of or novel uses of data, please come to the Data Ethics Advisory Group. Shameless plug, it's free as well. So please engage with us. And, we are trying to create guardrails for this approach. And and having an open channel with the group is really important, and we'll carry on and continue these conversations in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nichola, do you have some thoughts?
He had to leave, Len.
Right. So, Helen.
I would add that it was on the radio this morning that some major government agencies might be disbanding their demographic teams as a cost-saving measure. That seems to be a really bad thing to do at just the time when we need better quality admin data from those same agencies. And apologies for my video, it's clicked off computers.
Well, thank you very much. If I can make a couple of quick comments. One of the interesting things in the 2018 external review is it made a wonderful statement that since the 2000s, countries such as Canada and Australia have replaced the traditional census with a hybrid methodology, offering people... Now, that actually was wrong, and no one actually went to correct it. So it became the part of justifying administrative data first, which I guess to most statisticians sounds more like a religious mantra than a scientific proposition. And whatever your religion, you need a bit more convincing than that, even if it's from a couple of hundred years ago. And I think one of the real challenges we've had, we haven't seen enough curiosity. For example, as has been pointed out by Dennis, and even when I meet a Dutch statistician, I say, can you produce family statistics from your census? And they say, no, we can't. We're not using our international expertise, obviously, to discover what's gone on. My digging in, I have been horrified, particularly I do have some contacts with the British, how little we seem to be aware of the tension that was going on before they made their conclusion. Their 2031 census would be conceptually the same as their 1841 one. And so we've had a huge amount of partly misleading information. Can I just say, I think one of the most important points was made by Dennis when he pointed out that official statistics as information provided according to a specification and known reliability. A bit like blood, when we didn't have a good specification for blood, we gave tainted blood to haemophiliacs and a hell of a lot of them died. Because we don't know the uses of most of our official statistics, we need to meet the specification of what they say they actually are. And I think that's where quality evaluation that's been pointed out by so many people has been really important. Can I just thank you all for tolerating my chairing? I have never had to ask so many people to stop talking, whose views I thought were immensely valuable and would love to have heard more. And I think it's a sign that this discussion, that Barry was right on the nail in saying we need to do it. In my view, this should have happened in October 2024 when the mystery proposal was made that this would happen. It should not have been a state secret until a politician, Dr. Retty, announced it and released the methodological reports. That I think is a lesson for the new government statistician, and that they will learn a bit more about proper practice of the international statistical world. There's a UN Principles of Statistics, which one can test all of this with. Barry, it's your meeting, so leave you the final say.
Hey, well, thank you, Len. Thank you for chairing, and thank you for everybody that's been on the panel, and also that everybody's attended. I think it's been a great discussion, and PHONZ has been delighted with the response and the contribution of everybody to it. If there is a need, and I'll work with Len, and if any of you others would like another session, PHONZ is certainly very happy to facilitate that. So once again, on behalf of all the PHONZ folks, and thank you for turning up and attending and listening. Thanks to Len for chairing and being so enthusiastic supporter of this. As I said, if you have other ideas along the same theme or somewhere else, let us know, and we're very happy to accommodate that and set it up. So Peter, could you like to do a closing karakia?
Yeah, sure, thanks. Kia tau, kia tātaka tō te atawhā so tātou āre ki o heu karaiti me te aro te ātata me te whiwhinga taitang ki te wairua tapu āke āke āmeni.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.